Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to EX4 CSS. We're going to start coding a CSS file. And the purpose of coding this CSS file is to do all the formatting for this page so it looks nice. So we don't have to put all kinds of formatting inside the HTML. We're going to do it in a separate CSS file. And it'll be in a separate document that we'll be able to make changes to and update. And it'll be completely separate from our HTML, but it'll work together. So what I'm going to do first, just go to Chrome a second and let me show you where you can find some resources. Here's your HTML resources. If you go to CSS on the main page, it'll show you some things here. There's a CSS tutorial right on the first page. This is CSS right here. It's not that complicated. It basically involves an element and a declaration or a declaration block. And what that means is we're going to basically identify parts of the HTML and apply attributes. So if we want our body to have a background color, we'll specify body, we'll put it in little curly brackets, and we'll give it a background color. If we want our headers, our heading text, our H1s, to be a certain color, a certain formatting, we're going to do that. So what we're going to be doing is designing, really. We're going to be doing all that formatting stuff, except we're just going to do it separate from our HTML. And W3 Schools is a good place to get started. I have lots of other resources as well. But a couple things just to point out on W3 Schools before we get started. This is the kind of the introduction. There's a quiz there. You don't have to take the quiz. Here it talks about what CSS is. Syntax, this is important. This little blurb here is important, just to kind of know that this is your selector. It could be an H1, it could be a P, it could be an OL, it could be any HTML element. It can also be IDs. We're going to name things with ID names and class names. So this will not just be HTML tags, it could be other names that you give them. And there's two declarations right here, and usually we'll stack them on top of each other, but they'll include a property and a value. Color blue, that makes the font color blue. Font size 12 pixels, that makes the font size 12 pixels. It's like working in Word and just hitting the buttons and formatting things. We're going to be designing with CSS, and we're going to be using this code. And actually, once you start doing it, you might actually find that it's fun. So that's the syntax. How-to is important, and because that's the first thing we're going to do, how-to. They talk about an external style sheet, and that's what we're going to use. You can use an internal style sheet. You could put CSS inside of style tags, right in your head tags of your HTML and put it all together. You could do that, but we're going to keep it separate. We're going to use the external one right here. And all that you have to know is that it's going to say link rel, type, and ref. If you remember that, even when you type it into brackets, it'll help you. So I'm going to jump right into brackets and I'm going to do that. And I'm just going to link it. I don't even have a file yet, but I'm going to link it. And I'm going to go inside my head tags, and I'm going to hit a return. I'll put it as the last one. And remember, if you're not sure, just go back and look. Link, you can even copy and paste that. Link rel, but I'm going to try and type it and see how brackets helps me out. So I'm going to type link, type rel, and I'll put equals. And right away, it's looking for something, and it's going to be looking for style sheet. Link rel equals style sheet. And then the next one I mentioned is type. Type. And if you hit return, it's going to put equals, and it's even bringing up the text CSS, so you don't even have to type it. There it is. And then I'll do ref, and I'll select ref, and it's looking for a CSS file. I don't have one right now, so I'm gonna type ex4.css. Then I'm going to make an ex4.css. So that's what I'm going to use first. Now it did come up on my list because I had ones previously, but that's what you're going to call your CSS. You're going to call it ex4css. Okay, and then I'm going to close off my tag, and that's my link to my CSS file. Now I don't have it yet, but that's where it's going to go find all my CSS. So let's make one. I'm going to go File, New, and before I type anything, let's save it. I'm going to do a save as. And in my folder here, now I have a sample here. These are ones because I did them ahead of time, but you're not going to have that in here. You're just going to have your images and your index HTML. That's all you're going to have in there. But you are going to call this ex4, and it's going to be in your ex4 folder, .css. And I'm going to save that. Okay, and it helps to save it once you make it new, because then you'll get color coding like it's CSS. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go Edit, Toggle Block Comment, and I'm just going to put CSS file or CSS document. That's just a comment. It just tells me that at the very top that it's a CSS file. And then I'm going to get started. And the first thing I'm going to do here with my document is I'm going to put in a reset. And you have to dig around to find some of this, but what I'm going to do before I select any element, I'm going to select all the elements with an asterisk. It's called a wildcard, and it just means select everything, and I'm going to hit a space, and I'm going to do shift bracket, and it should make 2 curly brackets, and I'll hit return, and it'll move that return down, and it'll put my bracket here. And what I'm going to type in here, you might not know why to do this yet, but I'm going to type in margin colon, and this is the way CSS works. And I'm going to do a space. You don't have to do a space, so I'm going to do a space and put 0, and then a semicolon. So there's my property. There's a colon, not a semicolon, a colon, and then this is the attribute, which is 0 right now. And then the semicolon ends it. And I'm going to hit return, and I'm also going to put padding. And I'm going to put a colon, I'll put a 0, and then a semicolon. So these are 2 declarations I made for every element anywhere in my HTML. What that does is it resets everything. So I'm going to save this. And if I go and preview this, now that turned it off, let me preview it again. Now here it is. It's going to come up in a second. I should actually turn this and just refresh this one. This is what happened when I used this style. It took away all the default spacing. It took away the margin that was around it, all the spacing above and below the paragraphs. It took away all the default spacing. You might say, well, that doesn't look very good. Yeah, but that's okay, because I want to get rid of it so I could use my own spacing, so we can specify spacing. So that's all that does. So right off the bat, you know, it might feel a little uncomfortable because it's wiping out all the spacing, but it's kind of like erasing everything. It's like if you had a, you know, those default styles in Word that put extra spacing in when you're not ready for it. So we're going to wipe that out first. That's the first thing we're going to do. Second thing we're going to do is I'm going to hit to return, so I put spaces between my CSS rules. This thing here, this whole thing is called a rule. This from the whole thing from line 3 to here, this is called a rule. Everything that's here, that's one rule, and that's a wildcard. And it's a wildcard reset because it's wiping out all the margin and all the padding. That's all, just wiping out all the spacing. The next thing I'm going to do, I'll put in body. And we saw these ones before. I'm going to put in body, and I'm going to put a starting bracket, hit return. And what I'm going to do for body is I could do a couple things. I could give it a background color. I can center it on the page. And actually, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to center on the page. But before I do that, I have to put a width. We can't use this method to center it without putting a width. So I'm going to put in width, and I know my image is 840, so I'm going to use that for my width. So I'm just going to put width, colon, and I'll put 840, and I'm going to put px. And you have to put the px. And you might be saying, well, why didn't you put px there? If it's 0, you don't have to, but anything else, you got to put the px. So I'm going to put a width of px. First thing you have to do in order to use this method. Then what we're going to do, and what we're going to do is we're going to center the body inside the browser window. And there is no like align center for the body. There just isn't. So we have to use this kind of odd method. We're going to put in margin, and I'm just going to put a colon, and I'll put auto. Now what auto does is it puts, if the width is 840, it's going to put an automatic margin on either side, which actually works like centering it. That's kind of what it does. So if I save this and then I go back here and refresh it, you'll see what that does. It actually centers it. And if I move it here and spread it out, you can see it's centering. The wider my page gets, it's still centering. Everything else looks weird. There's some odd things. The numbers, bullets are outside kind of the margin here, but we'll fix all that. But it is centering it. That's centering all my body content on the page. That's what it's doing, and it's actually working. So that's a good thing. I don't have to worry about the top or bottom right now, so I'll just leave it on auto. Okay, and I'll just move this to the side here because most of our CSS won't be that long. One last thing I'm going to do with body here, and I'm going to set kind of a default for the whole page. I'm going to put a font in here. I'm going to do something called font family. And you can see font families coming up if you select it. It's looking for these things. Just ignore these for now. I mean, I'm going to actually use sans serif, so I could put sans serif in there if I want to. But what I'm going to put before here is I'm going to put Calibri. That's kind of a generic sans serif that is on Office and all those. I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to put Arial as a second choice, and I'll just leave it at that. Sometimes I'll put like Verdania, in here. I don't know if it's pronounced Verdania or Verdania, and I'll put those in there. And then at the end, I still need a semicolon. So that's a font family. And you might say, well, why did you put like 4 fonts? Because font family means it's going to cascade. If they don't have this on their system, it'll use this. And then if they don't have that, they'll use that. So everybody should have Arial. You know, that's why that's kind of more of the most common one is at the end. Although I'm hoping that everybody has Calibri. But this is like first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice. That's the way that works. It kind of cascades through the most popular. I usually specify 3 and then a generic serif, sans serif, something like that. So what that should do, if I go to my page here and refresh it, now you can see everything's in this Calibri font. Everything's in a sans serif font right now. And now if I want to put something else back in a serif font, I'm going to have to specify that. But I do want everything in a sans serif font. It's usually easier to read in a web browser.